just mark the beginning of our practice and express my appreciation for you. And we'll just be practicing silently together for a little while. So however you'd like to practice. So glad we could come together. It's said that the practice of the genuine teachings or dharma is as rare as a daytime star. And you know, I remember the one of my teachers, Khandro Rinpoche, was commenting in a talk she gave about, you know, what had happened with the Shambhala community having this upheaval and all of that. And I love her because she's so honest and fearless and very direct and in her speech and in her teachings. And she basically was just saying, you know, like, as lofty of an idea of some enlightened society or larger scale something, she was like, you know, really that's the hardest thing of all. And she's like, you know, really people don't want they don't want to do this stuff. They don't want to practice Buddhism. She says it's very hard, you know, to work with seeing through ego clinging. It's not a mainstream thing. It'll never be mainstream. And then she further on and went on and said, in fact, you know, if even a few people were getting some degree of waking up, that would be quite historical. She said 8 people in a big city, but anyway, so to be precise, but nonetheless, she was like, that would be historical. She was like, yeah, that's like, it's, you know, and then you kind of wonder, you know, like, well, is this a good use of our time? Well, that's up to you. You know, I think so. I deeply believe it, deeply, with all of my being, actually, with every pore, every cell in my body, I believe it. But so what? You know, because like she said, it's so personal. It's like each of us has to find our way. And I thought for our discussion tonight, I could share a little bit about a theme of renunciation. And I wanted to share with you that this cover of this book that I just have just recently put together and published, self-published, and Janet did all the transcribing. It's called Looking at the Universe Within, an Exploration of the Path. And so it's a bigger book. It's got lots of pages. And it's a story of the gradual path of Dharma, but it's as it were in Tibet, but kind of mixed with some of the Shambhala view, and then sort of my particular take on that at this time. And so, you know, there are the traditional teachings, then also somewhat mixed with somewhat different presentations. There's I gave this course. This is a series of transcripts of a course I gave at a Zen center in the town I lived in, where there was a Suzuki Roshi Zen lineage, which of course he was dear friends with Trungpa Rinpoche and like a father figure to Trungpa Rinpoche. So when I met the head teacher of this Zen center, we hit it off as sort of like brother and sister. And we're also second generation teachers in that way. And so I sometimes teach at their center, and I did over 6 months. We did a lot of classes, and this is what was explored. And this particular chapter that I just read a tiny bit from is chapter 13, Renunciation and the Three Natures. And renunciation is, in the traditional chant of the Kagyu, Takpo Kagyu, is a lineage in Tibet of Buddhism that Shambhala comes out of. The revulsion is the foot of meditation, as is taught, they say, and they say that renunciation is the accomplishment of revulsion. So revulsion is like, I'm fed up. I've hit rock bottom. I don't like samsara. My life sucks. Something sucks. I want practice. And then renunciation is not that stage, but rather much later on, as we actually know, we begin to choose to reflect our revulsion and and also our inspiration in our nature, and it starts to come out in our choices and our behavior and the way we work with each moment and on the energy of awareness and mind, and we start to accomplish this knowing what is worth investing in, what is worthy of our time, and what is the wrong choice for us, and in each moment confronted with that opportunity to choose, and so knowing what to accept or reject is often one way it's put. But anyway, just to start our conversation, so let me see. Yeah. So we're really looking into the heart of being an empty heart, having an empty heart. It turns out there is no one behind these eyes, not like we thought. And that makes us part of everything. But it's so heartbreaking because we can't possess anything. How many times have we tried to possess things, and how many times have we failed? Things keep changing. We keep changing. Things leave us. New things come in. Ultimately, of course, in the relative sense of our life, we die. While we try to possess something, we struggle against our nature. We try to make something solid that has always been beyond that. And also this notion of what happens is being. There is some kind of being that can feel and be compassionate. It doesn't have a solid thingy to it. And that's why there is this loneliness and longingness. But then there is no one that has that. But it still happens. We still feel heartbroken. I think it's because we don't exist. We feel sad about that. But we still feel. What is that? And so that's the subjective description. Sounds rather intense, right? But on the other hand, it's also joy. And I think the idea that joy is probably the most fragile thing in our heart. It's the most tender, fragile thing, and it needs nurturing. And what I'm saying here also is, here I'm very much focused on the compassion aspect. The notion that karuna, the word for compassion, actually is sadness. That's what it translates as. It's not compassion. That's in the English Latin word. It translates more as sadness. And it's that ability to feel sadness and not be harmed by it. It's not depression. It's kind of this incredible tenderness. And I really like to discern the kind of sadness I'm talking about, sorrow or sadness that isn't, Trungpa Rinpoche would say, it isn't self-pity. So that's interesting. It's not wrapped up in a story. It has no history. I think it's that kind of bittersweetness. Now, joy is said to be not actually separate from this, but just a different part of it. Personally, I think Trungpa Rinpoche, just my opinion, but I think he had a lot of serious sadness and trauma from escaping a genocide and witnessing horrific things. And I don't think that we can ever really, as much as he absolutely was a meditation master, and even his enemies that didn't like all his drinking, this great Geluk scholar said, I can't stand him, but I cannot deny that even when he's completely inebriated, he rests in the natural state. That was my favorite. That's absolutely my favorite comment about Trungpa Rinpoche. From someone who hated him, is like, yeah, he was an asshole, but he was the real thing too. And I think that's great. I love it. It's so genuine because it's not like all the people like they liked him too much. They're like, oh, he's a god. It's like, yeah, easy there. But he was amazing, sure. But he had a lot of sadness, a lot of pain. And I also feel his son did too. And I think growing up a refugee in a Tibetan refugee camp in India for the first 8 years of your life, that's some serious poverty and deprivation from even the culture you're in, and trauma of all the people around you who escaped genocide. So there is this notion of the wounded healer, this idea that people can be have a lot of trouble and still be incredibly compassionate and kind. And I think that's sometimes why Trungpa Rinpoche was so incredibly sensitive to people who were deeply suffering. There's this story of a homeless man that came tumbling and stumbled in front of him when he was going to enter a Shambhala Center in San Francisco for the first time. And this drunk homeless man just like fell and just like collapsed literally between him and the door. And as they had to lift him over because he was paralyzed on half his body, he couldn't get over on his own. And as they lifted him over and were walking, and he goes, completely enlightened. So there's this quality of just like reverence almost for like somebody's intensity and like, so there's a very dramatic, and I also have to just say the Kagyu lineage of Tibet, that it was truly dramatic, melodramatic people. I mean, they would like go into rooms and cry and write love poems. I mean, they were like that kind. Socially, they were on the opposite spectrum of the Gelug tradition, which His Holiness the Dalai Lama so beautifully exemplifies, this analytical, precise, logical, clear, sane, relatively virtuous, incredibly consistent presentation. It was also the most powerful and wealthy school in Tibet. But they were very much on this side, and they even believed, don't mess around with the heart. They would say, don't play with the heart chakra. They're like, you can go in at the belly, you can work with the head, don't mess with the heart. It's too dangerous. They were like, you'll get mental breakdowns, you'll have anxiety attacks, all these things will happen if you do that. Whereas the Kagyu and the Nyingma were like, what are you kidding me? It's all about the heart. So what if you have a breakdown? That's then sing a beautiful devotional song, use it. And literally Trungpa Rinpoche would say, like, I at times as a young man would go in my room and tell my attendants to leave me alone, and I would pine for my guru, Setchen Kongtrul, in a very intentional kind of like, I just think of a teenage girl, like with her diary and like a picture of the boy. She's like, no, I want to be sad. It's like, really enjoy it, use it. Why is the heart center so good? Well, because it's known in a lot of yogic traditions, and Hinduism especially knows this, but also in Buddhism. Yeah, if you can go to the heart center, guess what happens? As you drop into the heart center, you have perfect shamatha. Because when we love, the mind is undistracted. So it's a very powerful technique to use devotion and romanticism that way. The next part in the book, it talks about the three natures, which is the objective description that comes from the Yogacara teachings. First nature is called the imaginary nature. It's our thoughts. It's our labeling. And then the second nature is called the other dependent nature. You could say the dependently arisen nature, the basis of what we project thoughts onto. And then finally, we look at the third nature, which is called the perfectly pure nature or the true nature. And this is pure awareness, self-awareness, aware of itself, not confused, lucid. So that, I thought, could just sort of kick off our discussion about, how do we get used by our emotion? How can we use emotion in sense of devotion or loving our practice or feeling open-hearted and letting the world touch us? There's enough suffering in the world for lifetimes to feel. And so how do we encounter that and remain healthy and sane? Of course, on the extreme, depression or being overwhelmed and shutting down, losing our discipline, that's not the path that we're practicing, although that may happen. And to be more objective about it, instead of that romantic or subjective fuel of devotion, what about these three natures? When are we lost in thought and story, that, oh, life is so hard, this time is so hard, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really just a linking long story of thoughts projected on our reality. And it's not actually the only way we could experience life right now, even in the midst of all of this. So it's kind of like two sides of the coin, using that energy, not being used by it, not being buying into the way we get kind of caught by making stories, by projecting, but then not being afraid of the energy of our thoughts and emotions. So it's a dance there. And I guess the only way you could make that dance, right, is by renunciation. If there isn't some revulsion from samsara and knowing what that is for us, if there isn't some renunciation, then these kinds of techniques, we just won't do them. We'll have better things to do with our time. There's shows we can watch, and there's nothing wrong with watching shows. I always use that as an example. It's more like during the day when we just don't relate. At the end of the day, when you're watching a show, that's probably a good point in your day. But when we're in the middle of the day and we're not, connecting with our heart, our senses, and there's a moment where we could, and maybe we don't want to because we don't want to touch that sad joy. Maybe we do want to touch that sad joy so badly. So it's no judgment there, but just curiosity about how each of us, especially right now, which again is a time where it'd be very easy to say, this is a really rough spot, rough patch, or maybe things are at their worst or so far, or they're very bad anyway, or this or that and all that. And then how do we stay healthy in that? How do we practice with it, use it? Yeah.
Nick, this is going kind of fast for me for some reason tonight. Could you recapitulate the three natures again? Maybe in bullet point kind of form.
You bet. The first nature is the way it's called the it's kind of like the false appearances. It's when we believe in our thoughts. We can think, but when we don't know we're thinking, we create our reality based on our thoughts. That's the first nature. It's a realm of experience. Many people live in it all the time and for their whole lives even. The second nature is called the dependently arisen. This is like the elements. It's the basis upon which we project the first nature of thoughts. So for example, when we label earth, water, fire, wind, space, or formations of that, houses, objects, when we label those things that are there and are not opinions with our opinions and our projections. The labeling is the first nature. The second nature is the fact that there is a world that is dependently arisen of the elements. It's not based on our concepts, in other words, it doesn't rely on them to function. And then the third nature is what's called the true nature. This is the nature of our mind or awareness. It turns out, though, that's interesting thing is the nature of all of them is really the same. Thoughts are made of awareness. They're not really real. They think they're real, and when we believe them, we feel like they are. But really, they're made of luminous awareness. Secondly, the dependently arisen nature, it is, because it's dependently arisen, it's empty of existing on its own. It depends on every part depends on every other part. So it's has the same nature as the thoughts that are not truly real. It's also appearing, but it's not so solid. A lot of that is helped sometimes by thinking about the fact that things don't exist on their own. They just are. And when we see them, we might think they exist or have a label for them, but they're just what they are. They're all part of something bigger. How can you separate one thing from everything, right? It's impossible. Everything's dependent. So that's the idea of the second nature. And the third nature, our luminous, empty awareness, is not a thing. We can't find a color, shape, or form to it, but it can see all the colors, shapes, and forms, not unlike this crystal can reflect different colors perfectly because it's so clear. And that's how our awareness is. It's so clear and luminous that it isn't stuck being any of the things it feels. So really, you could say there's only one nature. But the Yogacharans were being very kind by describing three, because what they were saying is that people can live entirely in their opinions, or they could live relating to the earth and the real world with some opinions, or they could live relating to the true nature of their awareness and reality, the world and their thoughts as one spectrum of experience of emptiness and luminosity. Now, the reason I brought that up is because the three natures are a great way to measure our renunciation, because, you know, you go through your day and it's like, where am I placing if I'm placing most of my trust in the first nature, the false nature, or the nature of thoughts, then I just believe what I think, I believe what I read, and I tend to suffer and I tend to struggle and I try to get away from bad things and get to good things. And again, that's not, at some level, you could say it's neither good nor bad. It just is. Like, people do that. Maybe it feels bad, but it's not like I'm judging and saying that's bad. It just, I think there's suffering there. In the dependent nature, it's almost like we tend to take that for granted. When we walk in nature, we start to go, whoa, I'm in all these elements. I'm in interdependence. There are other animals. There's all this ecosystem. I'm part of it. And we remember that. And that might help us remember, oh my gosh, I'm actually not separate from it. Wow. But we can live in these different realms of awareness. And really, the choice is ours. But why would we be open to anything other than the first nature? And I think that's where this question of renunciation comes in, right? Yeah. Thank you for bringing that back. Going a little deeper through it. Does that help, or is there more that I could? Yeah.
Yes, that really helps, especially linking how that question that links renunciation to it. That's really helpful.
Great.
Nick, one thing I don't quite understand is in terms of renunciation. I'm imagining it's a process, and a process dependent on our awareness. And yet, is it a choice that we make? Is it an ongoing choice? Is it actions, choice and actions, or, you know, it's one thing to have the first part of that, but, you know, where does it get to be that it's not just in our head, but we're actually moving forward with that?
Right. I feel like the depth of commitment that we can enact for our practice and Dharma path, and I don't just mean formal practice, but I mean on the spot, when we have this choice, you could say literally in every moment, but it's so paradoxical because it really depends, right? In one moment, I could be lost in the first nature of thoughts and kind of be buying into it. And then suddenly, whether it's a horn honks and the dependently arisen nature, I'm like, whoa. And then I'm back. And then I might flash on the pure true nature and be like, oh my gosh, this whole thing. And then do you really have a choice? It's weird. Not really. It's called choiceless awareness. Once you're in awareness and you notice that thoughts aren't real, so where is that moment? Is there a moment? And I think your question really is so beautiful because it leads us into this question of, can you really practice renunciation? Or is it, if it's the accomplishment of revulsion, maybe revulsion is, let's go back to the beginning of that process where if we think of renunciation as a fruition or an accomplishment, then how do you get to this sense? Because I do think of it that way in a way. It's sort of like, I've been tricked so many times. I've been duped so many times. And there's some kind of surrendering, dropping into the heart. And there's a real price. It's like, I really give up the gamesmanship. I'm giving up the illusion that I even have control. To me, that's the fundamental delusion of ego clinging is, I have control. When it's not true, it's never true. And a lot of the schemas produce this thing, no, but watch, I think I do. And of course we do have agency. So that's where it gets so tricky, right? We can enact our agency. We can decide, you know what? I really like how I feel when I'm present. I think I'm going to commit to sitting every day. But that moment of renunciation is like, say I get up and I'm like, oh, I'd rather be cozy this morning. I don't want to sit. There's a little bit of like, fuck revulsion. I want to feel good. And feeling good is great. And there's nothing wrong, right? Once or two, you sleep in, fine, sleep in. But when that starts to become something that just keeps happening, at some point it's no longer a choice. Now it's become a habit. I don't want to get up. It feels, I don't like the feeling. I like this feeling. Okay. Well, then that's what we're choosing. And it's weird because are we even choosing it? I don't know. Oh God, this is such a deep paradox you've touched on. You know what I'm saying, right? Yeah. Do we even choose? When do we choose? Do we choose? How does this all work? Yeah, Stephen.
It seems like, and it's weird, it's like most of the time I'm lost in storyline, but it seems like what you've been teaching, these pathways of kind of make the choice, like turning of the wheel, instantly can put me in a different way of seeing things, of perceiving. So or going out to the park when you had us go out in the park or go out in nature and see the blessings in nature. For some reason that made a shift for me. It's almost like, even though I can get really sad and depressed about certain things that I've done in the past, or just get moody and sad, when I do get to that point of practicing one of those gateways, it's almost like, it's not, how can I be sad really when there's these blessings all around me? I mean, if I really believe and have confidence in those blessings, then it's really hard to be, there might be sadness in a sense, but not depression like you're talking about. So it does seem like our practice creates pathways that, and I'm saying this when I know in reality I can so easily get off kilter and like totally swamped and feeling depressed and fear, a lot of fear. But I think what you're having us do is, even though swampiness and the fear itself can be, in a sense, a pathway, because if I recognize I'm in fear, then I can turn the wheel. I can feel the blessings too, and then it shifts that fear. It can shift.
Yeah. I love it so much, Stephen. That's brilliant. That's right. That's how there's pathways. It's almost like it's incremental and accruing. So like first we sit down, we have a thought come up. And if our motivation is like, I want to feel good right now. And the thought comes, I don't like meditation. I thought too much. I can't do it. I quit, right? That's like, okay, it's the end. And then maybe they come back in 5 years and go, I tried that. I couldn't do it. I had too many thoughts. And then they hear something, right? Actually, do you know that you have 60 to 90,000 thoughts a day and it wasn't you? It's just, that's what happens when you start. Oh, really? That's what everyone? Yeah, that's normal. Okay, I'll try it again. Maybe I'll give it a little longer. So there's that. Do you see how that weird incremental? There's an incremental learning. There's some kind of affiliation with truth, with truthfulness, or what is really true. There has to be curiosity, or their path can't really happen. Once there's that, and I don't know, that is so mystical or weird. Like, how do you get curious about your reality? And I do think fear is a big reason why people don't, right? They're just like, I don't want to know. Don't go there. Oh, geez, I'm just trying to make it through. So that's obviously a big block. But if you're curious.
Couldn't fear actually also be a doorway? Stephen, you may have been actually saying that if you say, I don't want to look, if you're willing to look, even if you're going in and out of it.
Such a paradox, isn't it? Because you're right. Okay, so now it can be fear. Fear can be the gateway. I'm so afraid. Why am I so afraid? So I guess there is that curiosity there though, right? Right. It's like if I'm like, I'm so afraid, make it stop. Okay, I would love to. And that's fine. And it's a good thing to want it to stop. But why are you afraid? Why am I afraid? That question or that impulse. And there are people who have posited this, that is the true nature itself. emerging spontaneously in the consciousness of a being. Isn't that crazy? It kind of makes sense, right? In other words, you're either left with grace, you know, just by the grace of reality, or will, that I did it. But what's the middle way there? And it feels like, could it be that the true nature of awareness, lucid, self-aware, self-knowing, luminous emptiness, actually just can't help but emerge as curiosity in beings and just shoots out and says, I wonder why I'm afraid? Because it's bizarre to ask a self what it doesn't know. How does the self regard itself and think about itself? Because it has awareness. It's self-aware. It becomes aware of itself as a pattern. And this is what they say in the Buddhist teachings, that the animal realm is marked by this unfortunate problem of generally not being metacognitive. In other words, not knowing you're thinking while you're thinking. Animals have a range of thoughts and feelings and emotions, and they're just as Buddha as we are. However, often they don't have, or they have varying degrees of ability to consider what they're feeling and thinking while it's happening. That extra capacity, you know, it sets off all sorts of, but it also sets off that ennui, the sense of suffering altogether that's self-aware, like, oh, my life, why didn't it go this way? You know, you don't see a lion, you know, sitting there going, God, I'm such a failure. Like, I just don't think they feel that. They're just like, I'm a lion. And I think people are we all kind of long, even with dogs, they're kind of like, they're just like, I'm a dog. You know, it's like, I am what I am. Like, I think we would kill for that level of self-acceptance. You know? Just like, yeah, you know, this is what it is. You know, I'm this age, I'm at this point, I have this much money in my bank account. So what? I am what I am. I'm okay with that. That sounds pretty enlightened. Do we have a choice? When do we have a choice? Oh, come on, Stephen, that's too good. You don't have to, but I'm so curious.
I just probably bring this up too much, but when you take a hit of acid, you don't have a choice.
Okay, great. Psychedelic.
Which you're definitely showing us the pathway to, is the psychedelic realm, I think.
Interesting, right? If practice works, how does it work? It doesn't work by Paul or Stephen or Janet or Lynn or Nick deciding, now I will have an insight. Wait. There's no David Copperfield here. The magic is utterly spontaneous. I find when I'm meditating, I go, ah, or right? Do you feel that? You know, when you have an insight, your body goes, or, and you actually feel something. It comes to you, but you put yourself in the position to receive it. So as a practitioner, we're training in being undeliberate, in wearing out the ways in which we can fool ourselves. When we see a pattern or a habit, the first time we're like, oh my gosh, that's just a thought, that's just a habit. And then it comes back again and again and again. But it's said that every time we recognize it as just a thought, it gets a little weaker until it just sort of has no force. Now, that's not a choice. But was it a choice? Maybe there was the choice. Maybe it's not the point to get hung up on the causality of curiosity, but I already said it's true nature. How about that? But then what? Yeah, Janet.
Just kind of following that thread, you know, whether it's choiceless or this sort of inherent curiosity. In one of our gatherings in the last month or so, I remember talking about having this, you know, kind of meltdown and falling asleep, and then waking up from my nap and on the phone with someone, and I'm going, did that happen? Like, was that a dream? Did that really happen? And it was just so like looking back on the memory of myself in that state of meltdown, and seeing how, like, where is it? Where did it go? What happened to it? Where did it come from? Why do I feel 180 degrees different now? So I think having those kinds of experiences, like I'm not working right now, and I've decided to use the time just sitting more. Who else does that? Unless you're like willing to be touched by and open to and curious about experiences like that. And so I keep sitting, and I keep watching, and I keep talking to you about it, and have I fully renounced samsara yet? No, probably not. But I think that's, like Lynn was saying, like, that's the process, right? Is being willing to keep looking and keep inquiring.
Right, I love it. You when we question the reality we're in, and again, this is back to also what Stephen was saying with the psychedelia. I think of it as natural psychedelia, or that psychedelics reveal what's naturally true about our nature, right? They're not pointing to something fabricated. They actually reveal something genuinely, paradoxically, immediately, like a continuous big bang of reality, and this non-local awareness, which is not the assumptive mind's base of operations. The assumptive mind is like, I'm here, you're there, I'm thinking this about that, and this is real and that's not. And it's like, and I call that an isolate. Like, it's a schema within which the center and fringe relate perfectly, and it all holds together until and if you pop out of that bubble for some reason, somehow. Perhaps it's true nature itself, self-expressing curiosity beyond the consciousness's patterning. But as soon as you see something that's a quantum leap outside of that reality, you go, oh shit, that's called an insight. And you go, that doesn't, it's not that it doesn't work within it. You're like, well, you can go back in it and, you know, do the thing, but you kind of have maybe some questions. But if you, once you see it, it's never quite the same. And so I think schemas or isolates are unquestioned in a materialist society because they're the foundation of the functioning of all the work and effort and, you know, the premises of success and all these things. But when people have that existential questioning and the suffering of this isn't working, that revulsion leads us potentially to say, you know, and again, I potentially or not, it's actually been my anecdotal empirical observation over the last 20 plus years is most people who come to meditation and where it actually sticks have experienced some shit. They're suffering. Like they've had some trouble. Because, you know, when everything's going great, or so it seems, might not question it, right? Might not question it. But once and when, not if, things change and fall apart, you know, as they always do. And this is, and it's not to harp on this, but this, I was just reading this thing and it was like, it would seem but things do fall apart. Unfortunately, for everyone at some point in some way, ultimately death. And that is a cruel time to find out that you haven't actually been with yourself, that you haven't actually been kind to yourself, or that you don't actually know what you are, or you don't know what's meaningful. That is a terrible thing. I don't want that to happen to anyone. A life unexamined may not be not worth living, but it is very challenging at that point. You don't have to get to the end of your lives and you're returning to the source. No, in fact, we don't have to wait that long because it turns out there are losses, deaths, and defeats throughout our entire life. It's not all bad news. This is not just a morbid thing, but I did, when I brought up Khandro Rinpoche and her kind of fierce, truthful, she would just be like, sorry, this is how it is. This is the truth of suffering. And her approach is like, take it or leave it. I don't care. This is what I do. It's your chart. It's your journey. And I found that so actually comforting in her and also in Trungpa Rinpoche when I remember first reading, you know, Myth of Freedom. He's like, I'm not going to paint a picture of flowers and a spiritual, I'm going to paint a particularly dark picture. I'm like, what the hell? Who says that? Who dares this? And I turned the page, of course. Why did I turn the page? Again, I'm not getting lost in the past. I'm just pointing out to this fascinating causality that is almost non-causal. You can't really choose that you are. We just are. And that's what it is. Things are as they are. We are as it is. We are as it is-ness. We just are. And I think when we have glimpses of that, it completely messes with the matrix. The matrix of just staying in the samsaric grind and the treadmill. If you should be haunted by that not being enough, and I honestly think every being who spent enough time thinking about it would be, that's my opinion, but should you have enough duration or exposure to that? I don't know if there's any turning back. Now, how long that path takes, how long we're on that journey, I personally think it's endless because I can't imagine learning ending. And I feel like the true nature is infinite. So why would it, why would it need to end, right? It's beginningless. Why would it end? So it doesn't make any sense. And Trungpa did say, enlightenment, that's just the beginning. So I love that quote. I think it's just like lightening up and enjoying the journey. It's not also morbid, right? I'm just talking about, but I am focusing a little bit on that pain point of what motivates us out of the pain of dissatisfaction and dukkha, that Sanskrit word for suffering or dissatisfaction. Out of that, how do we arise?
I think you just gave a beautiful description of why they're called the noble truths, why the first truth is a noble truth.
Mm.
It's the ultimate opportunity.
Mm. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, it's really beautiful. The Lotus Sutra is really fascinating. It's very focused on a bodhisattva that has a kiosko on wheels, a little cart that has all these pinwheels for children, different colors. And he sees a house that's burning and he rolls it into the house, and he's a bodhisattva, and the children are all playing, but there's jackals and rats and fire, and like the beams are starting to come down, and the kids are just playing, and he's like spinning the pinwheels as he moves through the foyer of the large room and says, come, come. And they're like, oh, we want one. He's like, yes, sure, just come with me and I'll give you one. And they're like, oh, and he brings them out of the house. They follow them out after the shiny thing. And then the entire house collapses. And the children look it back and they look in horror. And he's like, yeah, you can, this is my version of it. Yeah, you can have the pinwheels, but I think you know why I did that now. And what, there's this very powerful kind of, it is a very manipulative, enlightened manipulation, or there's an artfulness and there's a creativity and an almost how do we take up the challenge of samsara? And how do we do that for ourselves?
Well, to me, that brings up a great point that has helped me greatly, is the fact that, to have a teacher that maybe can show you points of focus on the path, because there's so much information, there's so much, even just reading all the books or some of the books of Trungpa, and there's a lot of great teachings. You can tell when you read something, it just makes sense. But to have somebody like you, I point out, kind of to you, the energy that somebody might have to put into something to direct it. That's pretty powerful, is to pinpoint something that I could really focus on. And I just feel fortunate to have found a teacher. I think that's really been key for me.
Yeah, Yeah, ditto for me. And I appreciate that, because it's like, for me, that's my life's work, is my that's lineage. You know, my teacher's life's work is my life's work, is your life's work. It's like a collaboration. And I wonder constantly what the pinwheels are for each person I work with, if they even want to work on things. And the ones who do, things can go very well. I think there's a lot of heartbreak when I see how close we can get to the Dharma, and then to not dive in more for whatever reason. I'm always wondering, yeah, what are the pinwheels for myself, for you, for me working with any of you, for you working with any other teacher, any of it. Like, it's just such a fascinating, that's the art of Dharma, continuing to be a torch in the world, a flame that's passed on, flame that keeps the same flame, you know. Or at least a flame. Oh, we can't hear you, Lynn.
My cat just brought in a live rat or mouse. I get to get it. Sorry.
That's incredible. I think we'll end there. I think that says it all. Let's dedicate the merit. I'll just bring up the merit. I like having the song. As soon as you have read this confused dimension, may you be born in the Western Sukhavati. And once you're born there, complete the Buris and